In today's episode, you'll learn some uncountable nouns and some quantifying expressions so that you can talk about those nouns correctly in English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with about 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it up to the next level. How are things, Craig?
Things are pretty good, my friend. How are you doing? It's good to see you again.
I'm feeling fine, I must say. I'm, as always, ready to go and to get cracking on this podcast.
I see you're wearing your teaching shirt today.
My teaching shirt? What's that?
It's small checks.
Oh,
So we better explain that. So checks are what you can pay people with. You can pay by check. Not so common these days, but you can pay by check, a bank check. But check is also a pattern. You can have a striped pattern or a checked pattern. So Reza's shirt is small checks.
Let's move on swiftly.
I think we should move on quickly, Reza, to our first voice message of the episode from Mamin from Badajoz, or as you say, Badajoz.
Hi, Reza and Greg. Happy New Year to both of you. I'm Mamen from Badajoz. I share with you that one of positive things of coronavirus for me. It was discovered your podcast. At first was difficult for me understanding, and although today I don't understand all, of course, I feel that helping me very much. It's a good thing for me to improve my English. I usually listen one of episode every day. I'm grateful you because now I am in touch with friendly people on Facebook group that you recommend to me. Reza, listen your coincidence story with your friend Glory of Badajoz. I feel you have a good moment in Extremadura. If you decide to come back here, it will be great. Craig, too, of course. You're welcome, okay? Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you very much, Mamin. Happy New Year to you as well. And thank you for your invitation to Extremadura. I would love to come and visit the area where you live. So hopefully one day we'll be able to get there, Reza.
Yes, I would love to go back as well. Mamin, which part of Badajoz do you live in? I've been in the Campanario area. I thought it was very nice. And I've been in Mérida and Don Benito and a few other places. Are you from Badajoz city or are you from a little village? I'd be interested to know, Mamin.
And Mamin was referring to positive things from the COVID-19 pandemic episode that we recently published. If you want to listen to that and cheer yourself up with some good things from the pandemic, go to inglespodcast.com/388. Reza, can we help Mamin with anything that she can improve in her speaking based on her message?
Well, it was a very good message, but there are a few things that we could improve. You said, Mamin, that it was discover your podcasts. But we need to use the ing form of the verb because we're using the verb as if it was a noun. Imagine you said, it was gold, it was chocolate, it was my watch. So it was discovering because we're using the verb as if it was a noun. So when you do that, you have to use the ing form. It was discovering your podcasts.
And I don't know if you remember, listeners, but we said 2 weeks ago that we have a mystery donor who has donated a maximum of €100 to Reza and I for a meal at the end of the year. However, every time we get a message from somebody that forgets to put 2 after listen, we lose €5. Unfortunately, Mamin, you said, I usually listen 1 episode every day. You need to say, I usually listen to 1 episode every day. So sadly, Reza, we have gone down to €95, but I'm confident that we will go back up to 100 soon.
Another little thing you said, Mammon, did she say, Craig, it was difficult for me understanding or understand? But you should say, it was difficult for me to understand. You forgot that it should be infinitive. When you say that something is difficult or easy or any adjective, it was hard, it was nice, it was comfortable, any adjective, for me to plus the verb. So it was difficult for me to understand.
And I'm pleased that you are making good use of the recommendation we gave for a Facebook page. I can't remember, Mammon, if I recommended our Mansion Inglés Facebook page. You can find that at facebook.com/Mansion Inglés. But another one I really like is the chat box, ChatBox. That's a lovely community of English students over at the chat box on Facebook.
As well as forgetting to with listen to, Mammon, I think you said, I'm grateful you. I think you forgot to put in to. I'm grateful to you. So a bit like listen to someone. You are grateful to you. Grateful to someone.
And another thing, Mammon, you said you'll have a good moment when you come to Badajoz. It's better to say you'll have a good time. That expression, to have a good time, is very common. And I'm sure we will have a good time if we come and visit you in Badajoz.
Yes, a big hug from Mammon and all our listeners in Extremadura.
Next, we have some email feedback from Beatriz from Spain, who is currently in the middle of my B2 First Preparation course. And she sent an email that maybe you could read for us, Reza.
Okay, Beatriz writes, Hello, Craig and Reza. I'm Beatriz, an AIRC, Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig, an AIRC Patreon sponsor and current student of Craig's B2 First course. I wanted to say thank you to both of you. Congratulations for this amazing job. About what we prefer in your podcast, here is my advice. She wrote, it could, but I think she should say could it, because it's a question. Could it be possible to include more general interviews or guests? Well, that's all for now. Have a nice week and see you soon on the next episode, Beatriz.
Thank you very much, Beatriz, for your comment. And Beatriz's response was based on episode 400, wasn't it, when we spoke about the future of the podcast and what we would like, or what you would like us to do in the future. We do like bringing guests on the podcast. We have done in the past. One of the difficult things we find is with coordination, isn't it, Reza? To try and get 3 people here at the same time, or to try and find a time and a day to meet someone online to record it where I'm free, you're free, and the other person's free. We do try and do this, but it's not always easy because of the logistics of creating an interview. So we will try and do that in the future.
Yes, but we do agree with you, Beatriz. It's something that we really enjoy doing, and we think it's beneficial in many ways, including to hear another accent.
Absolutely.
And not just to have to listen to us all the time.
Not get bored with our speech all the time. Speaking of boring you, let's talk about uncountable nouns for a few minutes. Now, we have spoken about some quantifying expressions in the past. If you go back to episode 140, that's inglespodcast.com 140. We spoke about quantifiers such as lots of, a few, most, loads of, some, etc. But in this episode, we're going to go a bit deeper and share some more quantifiers with you and also look at some uncountable nouns. What's the first one, Reza?
Okay, so let's get started with a very, very important word in English, some. For example, if I want to talk about vocabulary, an important thing to know about if you're learning English, learn some new vocabulary every day. I use the word some. Learn some new vocabulary every day. You could learn, 3, 4, 5, 10 words.
So words are the countable noun, yeah?
Right? You can count the words, that's easy, but the word vocabulary refers to all the words. So that word, vocabulary, is uncountable. You cannot say vocabulary plus S. No, that doesn't exist. So if you want to quantify, say how much vocabulary, you could say some. A non-specified quantity, but some. Some new vocabulary every day.
And if a student asked you to be more specific, how many words should I learn each day? What would you say?
Depends how much free time you've got, but ideally, if you got the time to do it, I would go for about 10. What do you think?
Yeah, I think anywhere between 6 and 10 is a good number. 6, 8, 10, they're a nice group of words that you could learn per day, especially if you're revising for an exam.
Yeah, because the risk is if you go for more than 10, there's a good chance you won't remember them because it's too much information and you might not remember any of them. So better not to be too overambitious, and that way there's more chance of remembering them, right?
And 10 a day, 70 a week.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Information is our next uncountable noun, and we can put that word information with the quantifier a great deal of. So we've got 4 words there, a great deal of. Try to learn that as a piece of language, a chunk of language. If you're a Spanish speaker, un trozo de lenguaje. A great deal of plus the uncountable noun. For example, there's a great deal of information on the Mansion Inglés website.
It's another way of saying a lot. But it gets boring, doesn't it, Craig, to always say a lot. I've got a lot of this, a lot of that. So use another expression like a great deal of, just to avoid repetition and impress and stop your listener, the one listening to you, getting bored.
Exactly.
Use a variety of language.
Another example, Reza has a great deal of money.
Oh, if only that were true. But the truth is, English teaching and podcasting are very rewarding, yes, but you earn very little money. It's very little money that I have. So very little is the opposite of a great deal of. So the word money, ironically, you cannot count the word money. Of course you can count money, and it's probably a good idea to count your money to know how much you've got. But the word money is uncountable. So you cannot say plus money. You cannot say two monies. It's uncountable. So if you want to quantify it, you could say, for example, very little money. Or you could say a great deal of money if you're not an English teacher. Or if you don't want to be too specific, you could say some money.
Another expression with the word little as a quantifier is a little. For example, with the uncountable noun knowledge. When you know things, you have knowledge, and knowledge is an uncountable noun. What's interesting is that you can say a little knowledge and you can say a little money, but you cannot say a very little money. When you have that adverb very there, you cannot use the article a. So a little money or a little knowledge. And there's a common expression, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
I like that expression.
Me too.
It's like saying it's almost better to know nothing than to know a little bit. Because if you know a little bit, you think you know something, but your information isn't very useful. That's how I interpret it. What about you?
Yes, and sometimes I say things like, if someone asks me, Craig, do you know something about WordPress? I might say, well, I know just enough to be dangerous. Which means, yes, I have a little knowledge of WordPress, but it's a dangerous thing because maybe I try experimenting and I get into trouble and there's a big mess and I break something. So a little knowledge is a dangerous thing in my case.
A little and very little, they both have the word little, but I would say, Craig, that very little is even less than a little.
Yeah, I agree.
So by adding the word very, it even reduces the quantity more.
Teachers earn very little money, for example.
Yes, you can't get much less than that. The next word we're going to use for our example is the word bread. Now, in Spain, I hear people sometimes saying, voy a comprar pan. And sometimes they say, has comprado un pan? So in Spain, sometimes this word gets used as a countable, but in English, it tends to be uncountable. So to quantify bread, you could say, we still have loads of bread left over from breakfast, so we don't need to buy any, because we have loads of bread left over. We didn't use it. We have lots, we have a lot, we have loads of bread.
And leftover means remaining. So we have loads of bread remaining from breakfast. But when you speak informally, you probably wouldn't say remaining, you'd say leftover.
Craig, advice is a classic thing that Spanish people get wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, probably because of translation, because in Spanish it's countable. If you are a Spanish speaker, you know un consejo. Let me give you un consejo. But in English, it's uncountable. And that's a mistake that Reza and I hear constantly from our students. So you should say, well, you can say some advice. Let me give you some advice. Or you could say, let me give you a piece of advice. So you can have pieces of advice in the same way that you can have a piece of cake, for example. And you can also say a bit of, a bit of, a bit of. Notice the pronunciation when those three words come together, a bit of advice. Let me give you a bit of advice.
So you can't count the word advice, but as Craig said, you can count the pieces. So if you're very specific that you want to say in Spanish, dos consejos, dos, not three, not uno, dos. You could say, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of advice. So you can count the pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just the word advice that you can't count because it's uncountable.
Another thing that's uncountable in my flat is the furniture. We have 4 chairs, we have 2 desks, we have a television, so we have 2 tables. So you can count pieces of furniture, individual things, but when you're using furniture as a collective noun, it's uncountable. So I could say I've got too much furniture in this flat. Remember, much for uncountable and many for countable nouns. Too much furniture in this flat. Too many chairs.
That's another one Spanish people often get wrong, or Spanish speakers, because for you, your word for furniture is countable, isn't it? Un mueble, dos muebles. Not in English. You got to say a piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces, if you want to count the furniture. One thing we do agree on between Spanish and English speakers is that the word time is not countable. It's an uncountable noun. Ironically, like money, because it's really important to know the time, but you can't actually count the word time, right? So you cannot say, for example, I have 2 times. No, you can have a lot of time, a little time, or for example, you could say, there's not enough time in the day to do everything I want to do. There's not enough. That's a nice quantifying expression to quantify an uncountable noun. So there's not enough time. Enough means sufficient. So not enough means not sufficient.
Sometimes with these uncountable nouns, that there are situations in which they are countable, but the context changes slightly. For example, you could say, I remember a time when I couldn't speak Spanish. Or, how many times have I told you? So there are some contexts where it can be countable. As with many of these words, just know that usually, when we're speaking in general, it's uncountable.
And it's a completely different meaning as well, which is why logically in Spanish you've got a different word. Like, how many times have you eaten chocolate today? ¿Cuántas veces? It's vez is not tiempo. So we're talking about the word tiempo, time. That's the one that's uncountable. But yeah, you can say una vez, dos veces, tres veces. In English, one time, two times, three times. But if you're talking about the word tiempo, it's not countable. Craig, how many times have you eaten chocolate today?
Well, those lovely biscuits that we had made for us for the coffee break, I think I had 4. So 4 times, yeah. That's embarrassing. They were really nice though.
And how much time do you spend a week thinking about chocolate?
Every day, every waking hour, pretty much. Do you have enough time to do everything you want?
No.
During the week?
There's not enough time in the day for me to do everything I want. There's not enough time.
Speaking of uncountable nouns that are often confused by our students, equipment is another one. Now, equipment is uncountable. If you like skiing, you may have some skiing equipment. If you like photography, you've probably got some lenses and some tripods and some camera equipment. For me, for example, I've got a lot of recording equipment to record this podcast. That's another expression of quantity, a lot of. And again, be careful of the pronunciation. A lot of in connected speech becomes a lot of. A lot of recording equipment. I've got a lot of recording equipment. Too much.
Another word which is usually uncountable, but I'll tell you about an exception in a minute. Usually uncountable, love. A very important word. And you know what? A small amount of love goes a long way, listeners.
That's true.
A small amount of love, a small amount. So because I cannot say 1, 2, 3, 4 because it's uncountable, I can quantify it by saying, for example, a small amount of love goes a long way. Or I could say a little bit of love goes a long way. I said there is an exception. Yeah, a love can be a person that you love. For example, people often say things like, Mary that I knew 20 years ago, she was my first love. I've had many loves in my life, but she was my first love. In that case, it is countable because we're talking about a person. But when we're talking about the idea, it's uncountable.
There was a very good book written by C.S. Lewis, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, called The Four Loves. Have you read it?
No, I haven't.
He talks about romantic love, the love of a partner, friendship, which is a different kind of love, or the love of family, the love of God, and the love of your country. So he makes a difference between these different types of love, and that makes love a countable noun. 4 loves.
So instead of this case, it being a person, it's things you love, yeah? And that can be countable as well.
Yeah,
right.
Different concepts, yeah.
Craig, do you consider yourself a lucky person?
I do. I think I'm very lucky.
Are you lucky in love or lucky in cards?
I think I'll probably say I'm lucky in love. Yeah.
So the word luck...
For the sake of my health, I'd better say that.
The word luck is uncountable, usually. And very often, it's a nice thing to wish people luck. So you could quantify it by saying, I wish you lots of luck and best wishes for the future. Lots of luck, a lot of luck, yeah? You could say, I wish you a lot of, or you could say, I wish you lots of. So the word lot's curious, right? You can say a lot of, or you can say lots of, plus an uncountable.
As you probably know, liquids are very often uncountable nouns. So an uncountable noun would be wine, beer, orange juice, milk, and also, of course, water. To stay healthy, you need to drink a large quantity of water daily, every day. Now, you can say a lot of water, you can say much water, but Try and expand your vocabulary and use expressions, especially when you're writing. If you're taking an exam and you need to write, a large quantity of something is a much nicer expression, a more advanced expression than just saying much. So a large quantity of water.
Craig, in the next example, I'm going to combine both the idea of a large quantity and a love in your life. Chocolate. There's a large amount of chocolate in Craig's kitchen. There is, believe me.
In the secret cupboard.
Though it probably doesn't last very long, but for the moment it's there. So another way of saying a large quantity is a large amount. They're more or less interchangeable. There's a large amount. I could also say quantity. There's a large quantity or amount of chocolate in Craig's kitchen.
A word that will be very well known to most of you students out there, homework. If you're studying English, formally, you probably get some homework from your teacher. And as we've said many times, because of feedback you give us on this podcast, work is an uncountable noun. It's a verb to work, and usually an uncountable noun, and job is a countable noun. So homework is also uncountable. An example, you've got more than enough homework to keep you busy this weekend, said Reza to his students. You've got more than enough homework.
Yeah, be careful with that because, Craig, as far as I know, in Spanish, that one's plural, isn't it? Los deberes.
Yes.
It's always plural, countable plural. But in English, it's always uncountable. Music is another thing that Craig and I both love, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well.
It's one of our loves.
Yeah, exactly.
Love of music.
Chocolate, music. Podcasting is another one.
So many loves we've got.
So we could say, I don't listen to enough music these days. We could use that word enough. So we've got several expressions. We just got enough on its own. That means sufficient. We've got not enough. I said, there's not enough time in the day to do everything I want. Craig just said, you've got more than enough homework to keep you busy. That's more than sufficient. But the word enough on its own means sufficient. But it could be positive or it could be negative. If you've got enough of something, you've got sufficient. But if you don't have enough, then you don't have sufficient. So I would say, in my case, I don't listen to enough music these days. I'm too busy doing other things. It's a pity.
Yeah, I definitely don't listen to enough music. I listen to quite a few podcasts, but I wish I listened to more music. I don't listen to nearly enough music. It's a shame.
The last music I listened to actually was live in directo, and it's reminded me of a question I want to throw out there. The last music I listened to was live in Lisboa, in Portugal, and it was fado music, that traditional Portuguese music, and I really enjoyed it. Here's my question. Do we have any Portuguese listeners? I know that we have loads of Brazilian listeners. We've got a lot of fans in Brazil, but we're not sure if we have many listeners in Portugal. So since I was there a few days ago, and I was listening to live music, I'm curious to know how many listeners, if any, we've got in Portugal. Would you please get in touch if you're a Portuguese person who listens to the podcast? We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, we would. It would be interesting to know if we have listeners over there in Portugal. Please tell us. Another uncountable noun is progress, and we've just spoken about homework, and if you do your homework, you will probably make progress. The collocation with progress is to make progress. And if it's a negative, if you have not made a lot of progress, you could use the expression little. For example, you've made little progress this year. Now, that sounds a bit formal to me, Reza. I don't know if you'd agree, but I think in conversational English, you'll probably use the negative and say, you haven't made much progress, or you haven't made a lot of progress. I think it's more common in the negative, but more formally, you could say, you've made little progress this year.
It's the sort of thing you might read on a report from school, right? A school report.
Do you write that for your students?
For some who are not so good, for some of the younger learners. Unfortunately, Pepe has made little progress this year or this term.
Do better next term.
or the opposite. Sometimes I write, Pepito has made plenty of progress this year. Plenty of, a lot of. Yeah. But unfortunately, sometimes I do write little progress, yes.
Traffic is another uncountable noun, and an example with traffic is, there was so much traffic in the city centre today that I arrived 30 minutes late. So much traffic. Obviously, we can count cars and buses and taxis and motorbikes, but traffic is the general term that is the uncountable noun. So many cars, much traffic. There was so much traffic in the city centre today.
Another way of saying so much, but with different words, is to say such a lot. So it's so plus much or such plus a lot. For example, let's talk about rubbish, as Craig and I often do. Rubbish.
We talk a lot of rubbish, don't we?
We talk a lot of rubbish, yeah. And let's talk about rubbish. I guess that's slightly different, the topic of rubbish. There's such a lot of rubbish in the street today. It's a disgrace. There's such a lot of rubbish. Or I could say, there's so much rubbish. So we got such a lot of, or so much. They're pretty much means more or less. They're pretty much interchangeable.
So we hope you found these expressions and uncountable nouns useful. We're going to quickly tell you the quantifiers that we used in these example sentences. And of course, you can see these listed on the website inglespodcast.com/403. So the quantifiers we used were too much,
more than enough,
so much,
a lot of,
lots of,
loads of,
a great deal of,
a large amount of,
a large quantity of,
enough,
some,
a little,
a bit of or a piece of,
a small amount of,
not enough,
little,
very little,
and such a lot of.
So we hope you found today's episode useful. We would love you to share this episode with your friends, and that will enable more people to listen to the podcast. But now it's your turn to practice your English. We'd love to get a voice message from you, and you can reach out to us and practice your English by going to speakpipe.com. I'll spell that for you, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. Of course, you can see that link in the show notes.
If you'd prefer to write to us, because you're not brave enough yet to send a voice message, but we hope you will someday. But in the meantime, if you want to write, you could email Craig. He's at craig@inglespodcast.com, or me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
And that's the small amount of homework we're giving you to get in touch with us, say hello and tell us where you're from. And if you would like to do some extra homework, you can visit our online store at store.mansioningles.net, where you'll find lots of free material and some courses to buy to improve your English.
As ever, we'd like to thank all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on the Patreon scheme. That's spelled Patreon. If you're interested in joining the Patreon program, you could, for as little as $1.20 per month. The 20 cents is to cover the VAT tax. And you will get instant access to recent audio transcriptions. If you're interested, have a look. There's a link in the show notes. It's patreon.com/Ingles podcast.
And we don't have time to thank every Patreon sponsor individually, because there are thankfully lots of you, but we would like to say hello and thank you to our most recent supporters who have joined us this month. They are Maria del Carmen de la Torre, Luciana Schwab, Jocoque, Camila Caputo, Sadhana Serra, Jorge Alberto Borda, Eva Taberne, Iris or Iris RC, not sure how you pronounce your name, Iris or Iris, Alberto Valesconina, Patricio Hernández, Huescar, Aden Psicología, Landa Ochoa Eguilador. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Thank you to all of you and to everyone who's sponsoring us on Patreon. What's next week, Reza?
Next week, we've got so much to tell you about spa and massage.
Looking forward to having a massage next week. Please join us for that relaxing topic and have a wonderful week in the meantime. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.